There are 10 times more mentally ill Americans in prisons than in psychiatric hospitals. This causes stress on prison staff and other inmates. Mentally ill inmates are repeatedly victimized and often deteriorate while serving their sentence. Offenders who have mental health illnesses are not given proper care in prison. This leads to people reoffending and ends up costing us more money in the long run. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So why aren't mentally ill inmates getting the proper space and care that they need? One thing that needs to be changed is the way that mentally ill are sentenced. Because mentally ill offenders are being thrown in jail instead of receiving the help that they need, this is contributing to the amount of inmate suicides, the amount of inmate overpopulation, and the amount of money that us taxpayers have to pay. Specialized policing responses, also known as SPRs, are built on partnerships between mental health providers in the community and designated police units with the aim of identifying serious mental illness, de-escalating situations with minimum police force, decreasing stigmatization, and when appropriate, linking a person to treatment rather than prison or jail. Community-based treatment services in Texas cost $12 a day, opposed to a jail bed costing $137 a day or an ER visit that costs $986. States cut $5 billion in mental health services from 2009 to 2012. In the same period, the country eliminated at least 4,500 psych hospital beds, nearly 10% of the total beds. Mental illness costs the country $444 billion every year, and only 1/3 of that goes to medical care. We pay more in the long run because these people end up needing lifelong support because they don't receive the help that they need. The reduction of hospital beds is due to insurance companies not wanting to provide them and states just wanting to save money. Suicide is the #1 cause of death in jails and in the top 5 for state prisons. If prison staff were trained to identify specific issues, there'd be a lot of less suicides. Armando Cruz was 17 years old when he was sentenced to prison for life for attacking a police officer with a knife. Ever since he was a child, he had been hearing voices in his head. His mother took him from doctor to doctor, and he was either prescribed nothing or prescribed way too much. Because he was never helped properly, he ended up committing suicide by hanging himself while serving his sentence and left a note behind that read, "Remember me." Reforming the way that mentally ill offenders are sentenced by taking into account the mental health of each defendant where appropriate and providing a non-prison sentence for a non-violent crime will save us a lot of money and save a lot of lives. If a mentally ill inmate is sentenced to prison, receiving the proper treatment is essential to their health and well-being. The mentally ill suffer immensely because prison staff are not trained to deal with them properly. Studies have found that a sample of guards view inmates with mental illnesses in a less favorable way. The possible consequences of this additional stigma to mentally ill inmates include victimization, negligence, discounting claims or complaints, risk of self-injury, denial of rights such as recreation or group participation, and physical or social isolation. Because these inmates don't receive the proper care, they deteriorate. This is a never-ending cycle. The less help the inmates receive, the more difficult they become, and the more frustrated and stressed the staff at the prisons become. Rikers is located in New York, and it's our country's second largest jail. They underwent a 4-month investigation that led to the discovery of horrible incidents between prison inmates and prison staff. The study, which the health department refused to release under the state's Freedom of Information law, found that over an 11-month period, 129 inmates suffered serious injuries, ones beyond the capacities of doctors at the jail's clinic to treat, and altercations with correction staff members. 77% of the seriously injured had received a previous diagnosis of mental illness. Health department staff interviewed 80 out of the 129 after the altercations and found that in 80% of the cases, the inmates reported being handcuffed and beaten afterward. If a mentally ill person is sentenced to prison, providing meaningful treatment in prison will help rehabilitate the offender so that they are able to function in society properly. After an inmate is released from prison, meaningful treatment must be continued. The lack of access to treatment plays a huge role in the increasing number of mentally ill in jails and prisons. Throughout our country, mental health treatment, housing, and rehabilitation sources are insufficient to serve the very large number of mentally ill. If they are not given the right treatment, they will most likely reoffend. There is a tremendous difference in cost between prison and case management. Funding mental health services for these offenders would cost less than imprisoning them and could help prevent many incarcerations in the first place. Mental health services are dramatically underused. Over half of inmates with mental health issues never received treatment prior to being incarcerated. Mentally ill inmates are not receiving proper treatment, and it's costing states 10 times the cost that it would be for case management. Case management has come to be viewed as one of the essential components of an adequate mental health program, but the criminal justice system is not prepared to provide case management services to mentally ill persons leaving jails or prisons. Continuing meaningful treatment after prison is essential for the well-being of the mentally ill person. Reforming the way that mentally ill offenders are sentenced by taking into account the mental health of each defendant where appropriate, and providing a non-prison sentence for any defendant who committed a non-violent crime will save a lot of money and lives. If the mentally ill person is sentenced to prison, providing meaningful treatment in prison will help rehabilitate the offender so that they are able to function in society. And finally, continuing meaningful treatment after prison is essential for the well-being of the mentally ill person. Providing these services will more than pay for itself in terms of costs saved by avoiding the extraordinary financial and human costs of incarceration.